Hey everybody, it's Jordan here again. Today I wanted to do a video on my experience of meditating for about 5 years now. So I've kind of done like the math. I think I've done about 750-ish hours of meditation in total. And if you were to look at the graph, like the frequency or the degree of meditation would be like quite squiggly. Like there would be like troughs and the opposite of a trough, I don't know, and hills. There'll be troughs and hills. Sometimes there would be massive hills and sometimes there'll be massive troughs. But like, I think overall I must have done about 750 plus hours of meditation over the course of 5 years. Um, just kind of me trying to like remember like how often I would do it. And yeah, there's been certain effects that have sort of come of this, and I wanted to explore with you guys what those effects are and how I feel nowadays, 5 years later. So yeah, like that's kind of what I wanted to do. So I have like a what do you call it? I've done like a little layout, like a PowerPoint, so I can just keep myself on track, so I don't lose my train of thought. So I wanted to start off talking about, okay, what was life like before? So 5 years ago, I would have been 17. No, 21, 16-ish, 16, 17. I would have been 16 or 17, one of the two. And so I had started meditation then around 16 years old, and it started to get more intense around 17, and then it really sort of took off. Yeah, 16. I would have been 16 when I began. So this is sort of approaching the end of college, I think, as well. Um, I would have been. I was only in college for 1 year. I dropped out after the first year, so um, I would have started meditation in very very late into my um, very very late into being 16 years old. Um, and yeah, before meditation was even a thing in my life, I had tried it maybe 3 times, like at a young age, and it was really nice actually. I distinctly remember one experience where I had the binaural beats on, and I remember it was about 9 or 10 years old, and I had just started meditating, and I just didn't stop for quite some time. It may have only been like 10 minutes, but like for me, it felt like I was meditating for like at least an hour, and it was a really really pleasant state of consciousness to be in. And I was quite surprised as a 10-year-old how pleasant that state of consciousness is. So that was like one of the most memorable meditative experiences I've ever had. But even before that, I think my dad would encourage me to meditate when I would go around his house. And I think I had maybe meditated twice out of the abundance of times I had went to his house. And I think I remember meditating on his bed, and I had once again had similar sorts of experiences where I was in a sort of pleasant state of consciousness, which was really really nice for me at that age. There was a sense of calmness, of peace, and of tranquility. And those are my first experiences of meditation as a youth. And then I stopped completely, pretty much. But I still always had a memory of the times I had done it. And maybe growing up, I would meditate very rarely. I would probably do it like once per year at most, because there was typically like no motivation to meditate anyway. Or at least I don't really remember anyway. Um, and then yeah, around sort of late 16, I started to get into it, and in 17 it got really intense, right? Really really intense. Um, but during growing up as a teenager, this is what I wanted to speak about. What was my life like before meditation? Because I'm only 21, so I've only lived life up till sort of leaving school and leaving that whole system. So before meditation, I would say my general anxiety, and to me, general anxiety is like the kind of anxiety you have when um, you feel anxious about things that you don't need to feel anxious about. Like, I don't know if you've ever had that. I think we can all relate, where you're anxious about something that you know is actually gonna be okay. but like the anxiety feels more real than the problem actually is. Like I remember the severeness of anxiety I would have during parents' evening, and there was also a degree of anxiety just going to school as well. I used to despise going to school in my teenage years, and there was so much anxiety toward going to school. I even had like a system in my mind for exactly what I should do when I get to school, so I could like avoid people as much as possible. So I had this sort of system, and that kept my anxiety in check. Um, but my anxiety was pretty bad actually in school. Now that I think about it, I mean, I wasn't really self-aware of it because the anxiety itself, it didn't feel like an intense sort of, that intense experience that you get where your heart is almost hurts because the anxiety is so bad. Like I wouldn't have those kinds of panic attacks, but I would have like a sense of anxiety that was mild at least, and I call that the general anxiety I used to have. Well, for the most part, that anxiety, uh, well, we'll speak about the effects of it later. I had general anxiety, is basically a summary of that. Depression, yeah, I was very depressed. I was very depressed as a kid, growing up in school, more so than as a young child. As a young child, I was a happy kid, but when secondary school rolled along, I became really depressed, and I would have been depressed probably from year 9, year 8. So year 9, year 8, I think you're about 12 to 13 years old. I think that's year 9, year 8. I don't know what that would be in American terms, but yeah, I was a very, very depressed kid when I was in those years, and it only got worse in year 10 and year 11. Year 10 and year 11. Year 10, you're about 14, 15. Year 11, you're about 15. You're about to turn 16, I think, in year 11. So yeah, like the degree of anxiety I had during the degree of depression I had was pretty bad, and what really characterized the depression was a deep sense of disconnection. I felt an emotional void, like there was no actual emotions there. Like I didn't have the full range of emotions that like a normal human should have. I say normal in a more sarcastic way because it's hard to define what normal is, but in terms of the full range of emotions I used to have as a child, from anger to intense joy, and like even like laughter, like like when you have the giggles, like even like laughter, as in like having the giggles. Like I had all of that as a child, but like sorry, excuse me, as an adult, um, yeah, that or as a teenager, sorry, that all disappeared. Like my emotional range deeply reminded me of the movie Inside Out. And in Inside Out, I can't remember what her name is, but the little girl, she loses joy and sadness, and the only things that remain in her emotional bank, her emotional range, became limited to um, um, something like disgust or grossness, fear, and anger. And I would say my emotions were only really frustration, grossness, and fear. I would say anger wasn't really a part of my character. I did get angry, but I didn't get like angry. Like typically, like if I got incredibly angry, I would say actually I would start crying. So if like for me, anger resulted more so in tears than it did in an outward expression of frustration. So yeah, in fact, I would say I would have been sad. I would have been very, very sad. So my emotional range was sadness. Things were obviously gross and ugh, that kind of emotion, anger and fear. Like those four emotions were what characterized my depression when I was in my teenage years. But there was no real joy. I mean, the only time there would have been joy, it wouldn't have been the kind of joy I experience now. Like the joy I would experience would more so be like distractions, watching videos I like, playing games I enjoy playing with my friends, and those kinds of things. But that kind of joy, I don't really call it joy. It more so feels like I don't really know what the word is, but it almost feels like a plastic kind of joy, like a joy that is entirely dependent on an external faculty rather than a joy that actually comes from within. So I would say my life was practically void of joy and happiness during my teenage years being in school. And that really characterized what I would call my sort of depression or my depressive symptoms. And that really emphasized in college. After leaving school and getting out of that hellhole, I recognized how depressed I was in college when uh, like basically I was with my very small friendship group, and we were going to get some food to eat at break time. And I said to them I need to go toilet, right? I remember this so vividly. I said to them I need to go toilet. I was expecting them to just leave me, right? Because that's what used to happen in school. Like, basically, like the group I used to hang around with in school, I wouldn't say they were the most caring group, right? So, and that's like as far as I'll go in terms of that. But like, I remember coming out of the toilet and they were still standing there waiting for me. And I think I actually wanted to like bawl out crying because that never had happened to me before. Like, I was so used to just being sort of left aside or abandoned, like as though I didn't actually matter or I wasn't significant to the group itself. But they actually waited for me, and yeah, I actually really felt very emotional. I wanted to cry because that had never happened to me. But obviously, I know I'm in college now. I'm 16, approaching 17 years old. I'm not gonna cry in front of a bunch of guys, especially not around people. So I just held it in and firmed it and just continued walking. And that was when I realized I am a depressed, sad kid. I realized that in that moment I was very, very sad, very, very depressed, and I realized that there's a lot to do to repair, what's going on here, because there's a lot of hurt that's inside of this person that needs to be solved. So yeah, that that was my depression. It was pretty bad. And the inner voice, inner critique before meditation ever begun, I would say my inner critique or my inner voice was relatively systematic. Let's put it like that. It wasn't a self-destructive voice. My inner voice, my inner critique wasn't self-destructive. It was very methodical, as in everything was deeply focused on the surroundings, and everything had a system. So my voice would never self-critique. So I didn't have self-hatred. I was just deeply. I was in a deep state of self-loathing, I think is the word, or a deep state of sadness. But my inner voice or inner critique never really critiqued me, but it would critique my environment in various ways, shapes, and forms. Which leads to my perception of reality. My perception of reality before meditation ever begun was pretty dark, maybe? I think that might be the word to use, dark. I would say I had a pretty dark perception of reality. It was grim, I guess you would have called me a realist. I would have been a realist, but my realism would coincide with pessimism. It would coincide with pessimism. So I would be like the pessimist, but I would be a secret pessimist. My pessimism would be in here, projected outwards rather than displayed in my opinions. And if you were to speak to me at that age, I would have been a very opinionlessness. How do you say that? I would be lacking in opinion. If you were to ask me a question, I wouldn't really know what to tell you, because as far as I was concerned, my opinions didn't really matter in secondary school, so what would they matter outside of secondary school? So my perception of reality was quite grim, quite pessimistic, and you would sort of say it was like I tried to look at everything in a realistic way, like, which is practically like worst case scenario. And okay, the degree of joy or basic joy, it was practically nilch. The only times I would experience anything relatively close to joy was what I sort of explained before. When I would be playing a game I really liked or watching a YouTube video that was really, really entertaining. That was probably when I would experience any kind of thing, any kind of emotion that would be synonymous with joy. Pardon me. So that was like me before meditation, right? So that was sort of the state of consciousness, the state of being I had been in. And I could explain it in more detail, but I don't think that the details are necessary, really. Not at least for this video. So yeah, after meditation. After meditation, After meditating for 5 years. So this is where I am right now. So this is how I'm feeling right now, how meditation has affected me over the course of this 5 years. So nowadays, my general anxiety, like anxiety that doesn't really have any meaning, it's just kind of like anxiety. My general anxiety is kind of gone. It's pretty much gone. I don't really have it, to be honest. But I call it my useful anxiety that's actually useful or helpful. That still remains. Like for example, my brother was crossing the street on one day quite a while ago, and my useful anxiety spiked up as he was dancing in the middle of the road. So I picked him up and threw him over to the other side. That's an exaggeration. I picked it up and took him over to the other side. Because my useful anxiety was like, if there was a car coming, which I think there actually was. So there was actually a car coming, and he was just dancing in the middle of the road. There was a car coming, and my useful anxiety spiked up. And then I picked him up and put him on the other side. And then I realized that, anxiety is useful in the sense to which there's actually a real threat. And that's how I explain useful anxiety. But my general anxiety, in which there are no threats, but I'm still anxious, that's completely gone now. I don't actually have that anymore. I only experience anxiety when it's actually practical to my life. Okay, depression. What's depression like now? After the aftermath of school, yeah, it's pretty much gone. I don't really have depression anymore, at all. I haven't felt depressed in a very, very long time, and I rarely ever do feel depressed nowadays, to be honest. There's never a day where I wake up out of bed and I'm like, oh, life sucks. Like, I don't really have those thoughts. The only sort of negative thoughts I have are thoughts toward boredom, in fact. Sometimes I feel bored. Um, but that boredom is kind of complicated because it's not the kind of boredom where it's like, I'm bored, I should be productive. It's the kind of boredom where it's like, oh no, a part of me is actually fundamentally bored. And that part of me is something that has been really being addressed recently. Um, and that kind of boredom been is starting to become transcended. Like, I'm starting to transcend this kind of fundamental boredom that I had with life itself. But like the depressive symptoms of like deep sadness, deep fear, these kinds of things, that's gone. And what I had been overcoming this year, I would say, is just that more fundamental boredom, and that had been being overcome in meditation over the course of this year. Um, so yeah, depression for the most part, if not completely, it's completely gone. I really don't mind being on Earth. I don't really ever have thoughts like life sucks. Like, I don't think like that, and I don't feel sad at all, really. Um, and my emotional range is completely fine, like completely fine. Oh, I should also mention that after after college, I started to go to a therapist, and that was really good. I recommend therapy to anyone who is comfortable with emotional vulnerability. My therapist is a brilliant therapist. Thank you, Amanda. She really, really helped me with my feelings. Okay, how is my inner voice and inner critique now? It is not pessimistic, like to the degree that it used to be. Oh my god, it used to be so pessimistic. It is not nearly as pessimistic. It is not. It doesn't think of the worst case scenarios anymore. It's still very realistic, and now, if I ever try to self-critique myself, which never really happens, but if it ever did happen, my inner critique literally gets frustrated at me critiquing myself. So imagine the voice that you hear in your head, right? And imagine if I said, "Oh, I hate myself." Ugh. My inner critique would literally be like, "No, you don't." Like, that's kind of like where my inner critique is now, and I think that the reason that is I think it has a lot to do with meditation. I also think it has a lot to do with like self love. like the kind of self-love journey that I experienced over the course of therapy and meditation, it taught me exactly how someone should be treated and what the golden rule, treat others as you would wish to be treated, really means, and how in actuality we are incredibly sensitive creatures. We humans are so emotionally sensitive, and we are sensitive about everything. So for me, my inner critique, it or my inner voice, it's aware of that level of sensitivity, and it loves me back. So if I ever have moments, which I don't, where I don't love myself, my inner critique loves me back to normal again. So it's like a perpetual sense of lovingness, toing and fromming in my own brain, which is very nice. It's very nice. And yeah, that is more so after meditation. Like before meditation, as I had said, like my inner critique would never like self-critique me. It would never sort of say, "Oh, I hate you," and then it wouldn't. My self-talk wasn't like that, but it wasn't positive either. Like my self-talk before meditation was neither positive or negative. After meditation, it became immensely loving, and that was also really, therapy was also really helpful with that. Okay, my perception of reality. Yeah, my perception of reality really changed. Like the amount of, let's just call it forgiveness. Like the amount of forgiveness that I have experienced over the course of 5 years of intense meditation is like surreal. Like everybody is forgiven, everything is forgiven, every wrong for the most part is forgiven, and even I have forgiven myself. Um, for all of the bad things I done, because I was not a goody two shoes. Like I wouldn't say I was a goody two shoes. I was good for the most part, but I wasn't a goody two shoes. I did do things that I deeply regret. Things that I that took a lot of time for me to come to terms with. But the level of self forgiveness in me, it's so like freeing, and yeah, like I feel really good about that side of the coin. Like I don't feel guilty. It's funny, isn't it? Like that emotion. I can't really say the last time I felt guilty. Like just like guilty on its own. Like when you walk through the street and like everything is fine, life is perfect, and you smile, and then all of a sudden this guilt comes and you're like, ugh. Like that kind of guilt where the guilt is so fundamentally a part of you that you don't even feel like you're allowed to be happy. Like that guilt, for the most part, is gone, due to like the level of self forgiveness that occurred in forgiving or almost like healing my perception of reality, and that definitely came with the meditation. Um, the degree of joy and basic joy. Pardon me, sorry about that. My the degree of joy or basic joy I experience now is like, hmm, hmm. I think this is like maybe what a lot of people want to meditate for. Like when I looked at like spiritual texts, and like when I heard the story of Buddha, for example, and when I yeah, when I heard the story of Buddha, even when I was learning more about Jesus, not in a hmm, not in a Christian way, but when I was learning about Jesus in a more of an esoteric way, and I was learning about what his state of consciousness was like, and when I was investigating drugs like psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, ecstasy, right? And I was investigating all these things. I'd learnt that humans have the ability to experience immense joy and happiness, essentially, since that is seemingly what the Buddha achieved, and that is seemingly what we can all achieve. But seemingly to achieve that, you would need some kind of drug, right? Like, psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, these kinds of things. Well, it's kind of taught in Tibetan texts, well, not Tibetan texts, but in Tibetan philosophy at least, um, and Indian yogic philosophy. It's taught that you are actually able to experience the same degrees of bliss and happiness that you would otherwise experience if you took something like ecstasy. And what had, I guess, originally motivated me to meditate was that I wanted to experience this emotion, this sense of blissfulness or happiness or joy. And I had no joy sort of when I was when I was a young teenager in school and sort of college times. And when I started meditation, the joy started to come in droves. Um, yeah, I have had some very transcendental experiences of joy. So I'm isolating it to joy because I'm not talking about like seeing visuals. I've had those visual experiences, which are awesome. I mean, they are incredible. But the, the depth of joy I have experienced because of meditation in itself has been the reason why I have kept meditation going. Um, and nowadays, 5 years later, I would say my state of consciousness, the degree of basic joy I experience on a daily basis, is elevated. That is, I am in a elevated or a slightly elevated state of consciousness all the time. So like, I remember something from, I think his name's Joe Dispenza. Yeah, no, Joe Dispenza. That's how you say it. Yeah, Joe Dispenza. His book, um, in his book, he speaks about standard deviations. So he's speaking about standard deviations above normal and what is considered a normality. So, like for example, eyesight, hearing ability, like how many deviations before you reach a hearing or eyesight ability that transcends what is considered normal? And how many humans sit in that deviation? Well, if we're talking about joy and happiness and blissfulness, I feel like I'm slightly above a normal state of joy or happiness after these 5 years. The state of joy or the state of blissfulness or the state of happiness that I'm sort of constantly experiencing every day is much higher than it used to be. And I think it's also higher than it would be for someone who has never done any meditation before and is currently like depressed or like deeply sad or deeply full of voidness. Let's just call it voidness. Like in comparison to that degree of darkness, the degree of happiness and joy I think I'm experiencing right now is definitely not normal, or like it's not normal. Yeah, it's not normal. Like it's there's definitely some kind of heightened state of consciousness that I'm always in. So like it almost feels like I'm high all the time. Like I remember taking edibles, like marijuana, cannabis edibles, um, and that made me high, and it was nice. Like it was a really nice experience. Like I feel that highness, but it's not nearly as intense as that. No, it's not that intense. It can be though. Like it can be sometimes. On the odd day, it can be very intense. But for the most part, it's just like a very mild state of joy that I'm always in and that never ends. And I would say that the reason that I'm in that state of consciousness is because of like meditation. I think maybe you could sort of prescribe it to like being in some kind of present moment where it's like a state of fearlessness or a state of tranquility. Like I feel tranquil like almost all the time. And that's kind of like what started me on meditation. I wanted to experience these things that I was reading about in these books, and I wanted to know whether it was real. Um, and I wanted to know how far I could take it. Like now, I'm in it. I'm in it now 5 years. I want to take it even further. You know, I want to see what levels of joy I can reach. Like, can I get to the levels of joy that someone would experience after taking MDMA? Like, I'm curious because I'm already experiencing this level of happiness and joy. So I want to know how far it can go. Yeah. So, uh, yeah, that's kind of like where I'm at now in terms of what I'm experiencing because of meditation. And yeah, it's really profound. Meditation has changed my life, like literally. Like the before and after Jordans are different Jordans. You know, they're different people. Um, if you were to speak to the me before, you would be like, oh yeah, you weren't joking. This guy is completely different to the guy that I'm talking to now. Like even like how my eyes feel like they're more awake, although they may not look like it. But like even I feel more awake. I feel more alive, I guess. Um, yeah, yeah. I just wanted to sort of, speak about how meditation has affected me, I guess. I figured that maybe it would motivate some people or something like that. Um, and yeah, I hope this is somewhat helpful. And yeah, I hope this reaches some of you in a way. Maybe some of you have wanted to overcome your depression or your general anxiety, and you've tried many ways of doing it and it's not worked. Or maybe some of you are want to experience this kind of joy that you have felt maybe when you've taken a drug, or when you've or when you've or maybe you just want to have this kind of joy, this joy about life or being alive. Well, yeah, I recommend meditation highly. um, it's an adventure, it's an unknown, it's a journey for sure. It's a growing experience. It feels like you're watering a plant every day, and like the growth of that plant is very steady, like you're watching a sapling grow into a tree. Like it takes a really long time for a tree to enter into its fullness, but if you're willing to keep with the practice, then you can get there eventually. And that's kind of like where I'm at right now, I would say. As in, the sapling has grown a substantial amount. Like I feel like it would be difficult to yank it out of the soil, if not near enough impossible. Um, but yeah, like the basic joy is there, and if that's something you want to experience, and you're willing to keep on watering that plant every day, um, I recommend it basically. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful. Um, and yeah, no, have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. Goodbye.